Usually on this channel, I often like to discuss either the MCU's past or current failures, and how they came to be. But today, I think it'd be good to walk through some of their future endeavors, so that we can get an idea of what to expect from them in the coming years. The reason for this being that I don't think their future looks very bright, and I think it'd be worthwhile to share my concerns. And where better to start this Doomer discussion than to cover Doom himself. The revelation that Robert Downey Jr. will be returning to play this villain is old news by this point, but it's still worth talking about, because I can't imagine any scenario in which this casting choice was a good idea. Last we heard from Downey was that he was getting too old to play Iron Man, and he wanted to retire that role in pursuit of less physically demanding films. This notion was certainly reflected in his new diet for sure. So now what? Are we to expect a 160-pound Dr. Doom? The hope would be that this character would be portrayed as someone who is larger than life, and greatly intimidating, so much so that he could be a satisfying follow-up threat after Thanos. Are we to expect a Dr. Doom that tells jokes? Because humor was a major component to RDJ's Tony Stark. They already tried to attach his sense of humor to Ultron, and that failed miserably.
You know, with the benefit of hindsight.
So I highly doubt that would work any better with Dr. Doom. Is Victor Von Doom even going to be Dr. Doom? Or will they use some multiverse BS to make him Tony Stark 2.0? From what Marvel has revealed already, Von Doom will apparently exist as his own character, but now we'll have to wait and see how they explain why this new guy looks exactly like this entirely unrelated other guy who is dead. But I think these are all questions that most fans would rather not have to ask in the first place. It is unnecessarily messy and convoluted. RDJ was great as Tony Stark, but Victor Von Doom is an entirely different character, and I'm not so sure that Downey has it in him to transform himself to such a degree as to make this convincing. For Dr. Doom, you would want someone with a deep voice, a stoic, regal personality, an imposing stature, a story with a serious tone. On paper, this casting choice isn't really a good fit at all. Moreover, shouldn't we expect Dr. Doom to be a long-term character with a multi-film saga? Is Robert Downey Jr. actually going to make another major commitment like that? I guess if the pay is good, then why not? But on the flip side, why is Marvel wasting stupid amounts of money to keep this guy around when this move is entirely unnecessary? The announcement really gave the impression that Kevin Feige and the heads of Marvel truly don't know why their films were ever successful. They think that we just have this unconditional love for RDJ for whatever reason, so they think they can just wheel him out to do anything, and we'll just sit there and clap like thoughtless seals, because his mere existence is enough. The sad thing is, this is actually true for several of you out there. I just hope that at least the majority of you have higher standards than that by this point. If it were up to me, I would approach the casting for Dr. Doom with the same mentality that was used for Darth Vader. Now, what I mean when I say that is that they could get a relatively unknown actor who can actually deliver on the imposing physicality of the role, and if he can't speak well, then pair him up with a legendary voice actor. This shouldn't be too difficult to pull off, because if you portray Doom correctly, then we won't end up needing to see his face much at all. I think that one major mistake that Hollywood and even society at large makes way too often is attributing way more importance on actors than they actually deserve. Don't get me wrong, it is nice to see a familiar face perform their role well, but with how many Jokers and Batmen that have come and gone over the years, I find it obnoxious that most people haven't realized just how replaceable actors are. More often than not, a great actor can't save a terrible film. Though conversely, a skilled director can bring a good performance out of just about anyone. There are hundreds of iconic roles out there that have been brought to life by previously unknown actors who became household names overnight. On the contrary, there are also many roles that got ruined because some stupid A-lister got brought in to play themselves, regardless of how poorly they fit the character that they are meant to play. What's worse is that these people get paid incredibly stupid amounts of money to do this sort of thing. I'm extremely concerned that this very problem will occur when RDJ plays Doom, and with how important of a role this is, I think that botching this could be the final nail in the MCU's coffin. And speaking of overpaid actors, did you hear that Pedro Pascal is set to play Mr. Fantastic? The Fantastic Four at large have never had the truly great film they deserve. There was that 2015 snafu, where the director tried to make a completely different movie under the same name, then got mad when the studio meddled like crazy to stop him, but ultimately created an even worse disaster. Before that, we had the mid-2000s films, which would probably be considered masterpieces by today's standards, though if the industry was still competent, these movies would be accurately described as incredibly mediocre, especially in the villain department, with angsty charmed actor Dr. Doom and Fart Cloud Galactus. And before that, there was that one film we don't talk about. but that was all under the Fox umbrella, right? Surely the Fantastic Four would be treated with much more dignity and reverence now that they've returned back to Marvel, right? Well, I am certainly skeptical, that's for sure. The closest thing we got to a legitimate Fantastic Four movie was The Incredibles. I mentioned Pedro Pascal a moment ago, and I find him to be a contributor to that actor problem I mentioned earlier. Mainly due to the fact that for the second season of The Mandalorian, Pedro Pascal threatened to walk out on the show if he wasn't allowed to show his face more often. I see this as a major red flag, because up to that point in time, the Mandalorian's character had a religious desire to preserve his identity and never show his face. It was a major component of that story. Knowing that Pedro has these demands tells me that he cares very little about getting immersed in the roles that he plays, and instead is more concerned about getting headshots for his portfolio. A great actor can transform to fit any role. Pedro Pascal transforms his roles to fit himself. So if this is the guy they want to play the lead in this well-established story with a long and beloved history, well, consider me unexcited. Not to mention, he doesn't resemble Mr. Fantastic in look or personality all that much as is. John Krasinski would have been a much better pick, and everyone was all on board for that, until they ruined it. And like Robert Downey Jr., Pedro Pascal is quite old for someone who is just getting started in this franchise. I don't see him being able to portray the physicality of this character for very long. Plus, he's a major star right now. Is it safe to assume that Marvel is dumping ludicrous amounts of money on him for every minute he's on screen? If that's the case, it would seem like a terrible waste of money to me. So if you combine this casting with this weird Doctor Doom situation, along with the reveal that they'll have a gender-bent Silver Surfer on top of all of Marvel's latest flops, then this Fantastic Four movie is shaping up to be not so good. What also comes to mind is the fun statistic that every time a Fantastic Four member has appeared in the MCU thus far, they have undergone an instantaneous and humiliating death. Let's see if that trend continues. Next up on the docket, I'd like to talk about the upcoming Thunderbolts movie. Boy howdy, this doesn't look too good. This movie is being made way too late, and the story they're telling isn't even related to the title of the film in any way. For those who don't know, the Thunderbolts are basically Marvel's equivalent to the Suicide Squad, in that they are a team of villains being forced to fight crime on behalf of the government. Their most notable appearance was in Marvel's Civil War, where Team Iron Man made the wildly controversial move of recruiting supervillains to bolster their numbers. Some of the more notable members of the Thunderbolts include Max Gargan's Venom, Lady Deathstrike, Baron Zemo, Bullseye, and Doc Ock, amongst others, with Norman Osborn pulling the strings behind the scenes. None of these people will be in the movie, of course. In fact, the movie won't really have any villains on its roster whatsoever. So, what the fuck is the point? These poor excuses for Taskmaster and Ghost were technically villains in their previous films, but they were portrayed as misunderstood victims, without a hint of real malicious intent. But more importantly, who gives a shit about them? Aside from Bucky, this team is made up of the most lifeless, uncompelling, unexciting characters that the MCU could have assembled. No one is going to be drawn to the theater because they're just so excited to see Yelena Belova.
I don't get my period, dipshit. I don't have a uterus. Or ovaries.
You guys hyped to see Ghost again? You know, that iconic character Ghost that everyone just can't stop talking about? Because Ant-Man and the Wasp was such a great movie? Or how about Red Guardian? Excited to see him lose more fights? Taskmaster actually was on the comic book roster, but as tradition goes, the character in the comics is nothing at all like the character in the movies, and just having a person there with the same name doesn't really mean anything. Or how about US Agent? Because we simply don't have enough super soldiers. We gotta just keep piling them on. There's no time for Ghost Rider in this franchise, but US Agent? Let's give that guy a show and a movie. Can't get enough US Agent. Steve Rogers is long gone, but US Agent is here to fill that void. Don't we all just love US Agent? At least if She-Hulk was there, we could have someone to point and laugh at, but the rest of these yokels are just plain boring. Look at how colorless and dull they are when compared to the team from the comics. Who is this meant to appeal to? It certainly doesn't help that the trailer looks like a fan film on a shoestring budget. Why is Marvel even bothering to push forward with this? The Civil War storyline is long gone. Their films haven't even produced any villains that would be interesting enough to fill a roster with. And all this to say, it's not going to be a Thunderbolts movie at all. It's false advertising yet again, and it's going to be yet another of Marvel's many disasters. Speaking of disasters, we ought to talk about this new Captain America movie that doesn't have Captain America in it. Why don't we recap the Captain America saga to remind ourselves how we got to this point? The first Avenger was about a weak man whose strong morals granted him the ability to become a super soldier known as Captain America, so that he could save his country and the world at large during its Second Great War. Unfortunately, doing so meant he would have to sacrifice himself and give up all he once knew, including his friends and lover. When it came time for the sequel, The Winter Soldier, Captain America was rescued from his icy prison many decades later and found that modern society had changed so much that it had become completely alien to him. The more innocent ideals of the past were forgotten, along with all that he knew and loved. His new mission is to restore the greatness and trust of his generation back into society, as well as building new friendships and a new life for himself in this new era. However, things get complicated when his closest friend from the past returns as a new enemy. This carries over into the third film, Civil War, where Captain America's two worlds collide. His new modern friends are at odds with his best friend from the past, but Captain America will go through great lengths to redeem his old friend, even if it means jeopardizing the new life he's been building up, because he would rather risk it all than allow an undeserving man to die for reasons beyond his control. This brings us to the fourth movie, where none of the previously mentioned characters are involved. Instead, we will watch a bird fight the president for some reason. How did we get here? Well, it's because between films, Captain America made peace with his modern friend, whom he just had a falling out with. Then said friend died. Then Captain America decided that the well-being of his old friend, and the new life he was building up, didn't really matter to him that much after all. So he abandoned all of it on a whim, in order to reunite with his love from the past, whom he never actually went on a single date with, and was less romantically involved with than his current girlfriend, who he abandoned. Then he returns to the modern world as an elder to pass on his mantle, not to his old friend, who is also a super soldier from another time that has similar morals and is in need of a new super persona. No, instead he will give the mantle to his bird friend, who is not a super soldier and would not be able to wield his shield as effectively, and who already is mostly bulletproof, so he doesn't even need the shield in the first place. He is also someone with an already well-established super persona, and is someone Captain America did not know for a very long time, comparatively speaking. Why did Captain America make this decision? Because his writers made race a higher priority than the story. That's quite literally the only reason. And now Birdman is somehow going to fight a Hulk. Because this is exactly what the first three films are building up to, right? Yeah, we'll just have Falcon face off against Thunderbolt Ross, that classic Captain America villain. Not to be confused with the oddly timed Thunderbolts movie, which is also coming out soon, and is where we will find Bucky instead. And if this all seems bass-ackwards, well, that's because it is. On the topic of Thunderbolt Ross, this take may be controversial, but it needs to be said. Red Hulk is a dumb concept. General Ross was way more interesting when he was just a man trying to take down this uncontrollable beast. Hulk already had many other strength-matching villains, like Abomination, Bi-Beast, the Wendigo, and many others. So the inclusion of a second Hulk, who doesn't have the control weaknesses of the first Hulk, is just a waste of paper and ink. And his existence completely misses the point of why the real Hulk and Ross exist in the first place. Ross is a normal man, trying to take control from a creature that has no control to give. Giving Ross complete control over a relative power just makes the whole conflict seem redundant. On top of that, what little appeal the Red Hulk had was that his identity was a big mystery when he first showed up, and a big investigation had to be conducted to figure out just who he was. But I guess the writers of this film don't care about it as much as the rest of us, so they just aren't going to bother with that element of the story. Abolish Red Hulk. He stinks. Anyway, I'm sure this movie won't also be incredibly inflammatory due to it having an antagonistic old white president appearing hot off the heels of an extremely heated real-life election. Nah, I'm sure this movie won't make any parallels, won't paint anyone in a bad light, and won't try to send any political messages whatsoever.
You've got to do better, Senator.
Can't wait. Another project around the corner is the return of Daredevil, alongside Kingpin and the Punisher. The old Daredevil series was pretty magnificent, and the news of its return should be more exciting, if only we didn't just see the Kingpin get manhandled by children, and see Daredevil perform a walk of shame after a one-night stand with the Green Gremlin of the Uncanny Valley. Now, I, like most of you, want this show to be good. We don't want this to fail. But we've also wanted that for every Marvel show that's come and gone. But with Marvel's recent track record, I'd say it's more than fair to be skeptical in their ability to recapture the magic that made the first series so enjoyable. The more likely outcome is that Marvel will continue to drag these once beloved characters through the dirt, and taint everyone's image of how great they should be. I hope I'm wrong, but we'll see. Lastly, for this video, we should talk about the Blade film, or lack thereof. Blade is an original black character within Marvel, who is beloved by fans, and who has already proven to be a box office draw in a pre-MCU era. Blade should have been an easy moneymaker for Marvel, but instead of portraying this character the right way, they continue to phone in their scripts that push Blade to the side in favor of female leads that have messages to deliver. Thankfully, at least some people behind the scenes have some lick of common sense, because this crap is getting shut down and indefinitely postponed, until they can allegedly deliver the quality that this film deserves. But now that means instead of an easy win, in the name of controversy-free diversity, we are now just left with the second best Captain Falcon. Falcon kick! So in conclusion, it would seem that Marvel is yet to learn from their ongoing failures. Their post-Endgame efforts have been atrocious. They seem to have gotten so big that they made the mistake of thinking they could do no wrong, but now they don't even remember how they got big in the first place. I used to be a lifelong fan of this company, as I'm sure most of you watching were as well, but after every flop that comes and goes with each new year, the hope that Marvel can turn things around grows ever slimmer. Maybe they'll figure it out someday, but that day doesn't seem to be approaching anytime soon.